the situation for women and feminists in Latin America through this crisis of the COVID. And now we are going to introduce our panelists here. And I think we have a very privileged situation because we have very distinguished panelists. And I'm starting with Virginia Vargas. And I think that many people know Virginia. She has been working for many decades, I think, with the feminist movement in Latin America. And she's one of the best well-known leaders of this feminist movement, not only in Peru, but in most countries in Latin America. And she has also been the one that delivered the resolution of Mar del Plata to Beijing in 1995. I was speaking with my students on that issue this morning. So, Virginia, she's also a sociologist, so she works at, she has worked for 9 years at Flora Tristan, the Institute of Flora Tristan. And we have been friends also for many years, and I'm very happy she is with us. Then I'm going to Paloma, and Paloma Bonfil, she is in Mexico City, and she's a social anthropologist. And she has been working also for many, many years with indigenous women in Mexico, both regarding studies on indigenous women and also as a militant, as a feminist militant with all these groups. And she's now working at the Institute of Social Anthropology in Mexico, and she is, she's also a good friend of mine, and we are working in several projects, and I'm very happy that you accepted to be with us. And there we have Graciela Di Marco from Argentina. Graciela is also a sociologist. She has published many books and theories regarding feminists and women in Latin America. And I'm very happy that she's with us because she has also put together this notion of the feminist people. And she has been working a lot on the situation in Argentina, and she is also a very well-known feminist in Latin America. So we are all feminists, we are all researchers, and we are all observers of what is happening in Latin America. And I'm very happy to welcome you, Graciela, as well to this panel. And so I put several questions to our panelists, and we have 1.5 hours, so I will try to go very quickly through these questions. And the first one is how the measures, the contingency measures taken by different governments in Latin America have affected different women groups, in the sense of the labor market, the access to basic products, the situation regarding violence, and many other situations. And I'm going to ask the panelists to have questions on this. We have 3 main questions, short answers, so we can have also time for a discussion. So the first question is how these measures have affected, regarding the pandemic in different countries in Latin America, have affected women of different groups in all these aspects. So I'm going to invite first Virginia, Gina, to start.
Sure. Well, this pandemic has affects everybody, but some worse than the others, because I think that inequality has been the characteristics of Latin America. Latin America is the most unequal continent of all, and this is reflecting in the impact of the crisis. Women, for example, are one of the main ones, because not only because of loss of job, because they are in the informal sector, because the domestic workers don't have any work now, etc. But because the accentuation of domestic violence. No, we know that that is a characteristic, unluckily, of our societies. But it is impressive to see how strong has been, and to be in the whole Latin America, and also obviously in Peru. Because the house has begun to be the most insecure space for women now that they are in this situation. Although they have been implemented a lot of things, phones and possibility of the nouns, etc. There is a very difficult possibility to have all the things of the women, not only in the private sector, but also in the public. There has been rapes, for example, in Chile, in Bolivia, from the military forces or police forces to the women, no? And for many of the women has been rape, obviously. The rape has begun to be incestuous, with half of them girls, and not only women with more age. And well, that the situation is worse in the places where the house is one or two rooms, and there's no water, there's no electricity, and there's no money. So it is very, very complicated, but are not the only ones. Violence against children has obviously begun to be very visible because of the neighbors that call the police to say that somebody is beating the children in the houses. And all the indigenous women have a especially problematic situation, but Paloma is going to speak about that. Only I want to say that the access to health system is very, very low, without intercultural gaze, without their own language, so it's very, very complicated. And the migrants are very complicated situation. We have in Latin America, because of the crisis of Venezuela, a lot of Venezuelan people in the different countries. Now in Peru, I have seen in the morning, they are just going to their country, walking, because here they don't have any more house or employment. Even also the migrants from the country, that are in Lima, in the capital, they are beginning to go with children, with family, to their own countries, their own places of original living, having lost everything. Transsexuals also, travestis and transsexuals are beginning to be very much attacked. It is interesting to say that here in Peru, the president is, first of all, he's putting up the violence against women as a very, very important case that we have to stop, and also giving the trans the possibility that if they have another name in their identity card, and they have another face, it doesn't matter, they have the right to have this kind of difference. But all this, just to finish with this, is I think that adding to the strong pre-existing racism against immigrants, there has been how can I say, an environmental racism that defines who are the most infected and have more deaths. For example, I forget to speak about people in jail, no? That you can imagine how difficult is the situation. But it is very difficult because Brazil is the most scandalous, because it is a kind of viral extermination of indigenous and Black people. And it is on purpose. It's not a thing that happens because society is racist, but because he wants that. No? This experience put racism in the center of our reflection during the pandemic, also with all the other things. No? Yes.
Okay, thank you. Paloma, please.
Okay, I'd like to share my screen. Can you see it?
No, not yet.
Here it goes.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very grateful with Edme, because I'd like to tell you about specific sector of women in Mexico and in Latin America, but I'm going to focus on Mexico, which is the indigenous population, and especially indigenous women. I'd like to focus on three main issues. I'd like to tell you that indigenous people and indigenous women are subject to exploitation, discrimination, and racism all over Latin America. So these conditions of marginalization and exclusion make them more vulnerable to a pandemic such as COVID in every sense. So we can speak as a of a different impact in this population, because they have experienced the exacerbation of their difficult conditions, living conditions. And so since these inequalities and harsh living conditions are pushed to the limits, there are three things that I like to underline regarding indigenous women. First, there is a tension between the Mexican feminist movements and the indigenous feminists, because this colonial relationship that we still have in Mexico. We cannot speak about the rights of indigenous women or non-indigenous women in Mexico as having the same condition, because indigenous women are located into economical and social spheres that worsen their opportunities of exercise their rights. So that's the first thing. The second one is that the Mexican government has decided to go through semi-closure of public activities and economic activities, and this has had a very difficult result on the poorest sector of the population, because indigenous population, which are the poorest of the poor in Mexico, seldom have access to health, to education, and to sanitary conditions. And now the confinement has made these conditions worse. And well, since the Mexican government is not allowing or not willing to adapt itself, it has decreed a lot of public funding cuts that have already a very severe impact over indigenous people. For example, we've lost in a month and a half 1 million jobs, formal jobs. We don't know how many informal jobs have been impacted by these measures. And then staying at home, because of what Gina Vargas just said, is not an option for many indigenous women, because of the violence, of gender violence, because of sanitary conditions, and because they live day by day. So when speaking about this specific impact over indigenous women, what I like to tell you is that economically, COVID has affected the informal economy specifically. We don't have now, for example, we don't have these merchants in the streets. They don't have anything to sell, and there are no people to buy their products. We don't have, for example, their artisans selling their handcrafts, because we don't have tourism anymore. Peasant workers are not able to sell their products because there is no transportation and they don't have access to markets. So the poor population has experienced a worsening of their conditions. What we have to have in mind is that conditions of indigenous women in cities and in the countryside are different. For example, in cities, although we could say that they would have more access to, for example, hospitals or healthcare, they do not. Our government has choose to, what they say, to flatten the curve of the pandemic. So what we are going to go through is through a very long period of COVID, as not to have the hospitals overwhelmed with sick persons. That means that the health services are oriented now to attend COVID. And what indigenous women need, for example, when having birth or any health issues, is that they don't have any place to go in cities. In the countryside, they use their own traditional medicine and networks, and they more or less cope with this. But these are the conditions that we have in front of the pandemic. And what we do have also is that since children are not going to school and they stay at home, domestic labor has increased. And also it diminishes the possibility of women to get any monetary income. So all these conditions, all these daily life conditions have increased the burden of the gender burden of carrying activities. Well, as in some towns in Mexico, indigenous people have decided to close themselves. So they have closed the roads. They don't let people go outside or get into their tiny towns. And so we're experiencing scarce food. And we're experiencing also the difficult to get medical attention when you have a COVID exposure in some of Mexican towns. There is not enough information that gets through the mentality and the traditional ways of thinking of indigenous people. So public information is not adapted, culturally adapted to indigenous population. And what we have had in Mexico, which is very sad, is that people or even don't think that the virus is a true thing. They think that it's something invented and it's not real. And also they have developed this fear that got into attacking medical staff, especially nurses. And this has been very sad in Mexico. They've torched houses. They've killed two nurses around 3 weeks ago. They've been nurses in public transportation have been with acid and with chlorine. And so this is happening in the poorest sector of our society and also in indigenous communities, where if you say that you have, for example, a person who's suffering from COVID, then the whole community would, like lock the family out or even expel them from the community. So we have a very serious situation of information and security and also of social response, because we haven't had an appropriate cultural answer to this problem within indigenous societies. So, well, I think this is my time now.
Yes. You can continue afterwards on this, but you can continue, Paloma, after this.
Thank you.
I will give the word to Graciela now. And can you put your, Paloma, can you show?
Stop share.
Yes. Graciela, please.
Hi. First of everything, thank you very much, Edme, for this invitation. This is just the moment in which my cell phone is.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Oh, no.
Really, excuse me. I am very grateful to Edme for inviting me to this webinar, and I am very happy sharing this with my friend Gina and with my new friend Paloma. I will present some issues in Argentina coping with the pandemic that obviously has some similarities with what my colleagues have said, and the others have some kind of peculiarities, but not too much peculiarities. So I would like to introduce, to put also a PowerPoint.
Share.
And I'll share this PowerPoint. Also in order to be understood, because maybe my English is not accurate to be easily understood. So I would like to point that I used different sources to do that. The National Council of Sciences had done a report on March 2020 that, and then I took from this several things. Also, the gender gaps in Argentina, it was very useful. A survey on unpaid work and use of the time of the National Statistics Agency, and the information about femicides of 2 observatories. One that is called, it is, you can see I have to enlarge it. I see if it is possible.
Sí.
Yes.
Un observatory called Now That They Do See Us, that is the name when we went to marches for abortion law. We have a kind of a song and dance that was Now That You See Us, because it was a great appearance of feminism in the public sphere, especially since 2015 to here. And the other is a national registry of one organization that is called MUMALAT, that is Mujeres de la Matria Latinoamericana, with whom I use to do several works at community centers. So I am very familiar with them, and they are doing a very good job. So, as my colleague said, that the deepening of inequalities regarding class, gender, ethnic, racial, immigration status, access to paid work, regional differences, among other differences, mostly affects women, always in my country. This is the structural base in which the quarantine and the situation of risk that we are suffering is going on the top of this. It will deepen all the inequalities that were pre-existent. For example, 89% of women perform 76% of unpaid household chores. It is impossible that it could change for better in the quarantine. It changed for worse. Only 58% of men participate in these jobs, and they dedicate to these jobs 3.4 hours. Women use 4 hours per week for these kind of chores. 4 out of 10 employees are women. Of all the employees in the country, are women inserted in jobs related to household and care tasks, education, health workers, domestic service, social workers. Comparing with males, lower wages than males, higher level of informality, higher levels of unemployment, and with this structural situation that obviously it is worse in the regions in which we also have an important indigenous population. That sometimes for Argentinians is something that many people don't want to see. But we have indigenous population with serious situations in all these aspects I have told. And COVID-19 pandemic. On one side, women are affected by the deepening of these structural conditions. At the other, they are at the front of myriad of care tasks in public systems and in the private sphere. In the public system, women as agents of care, education, health, medical doctors, nurses, cleaning personnel are women, especially women. And they also suffer discrimination in their neighborhoods or in the places in which they live, because people know that they are or medical doctors or nurses or are part of the cleaning staff or a clinic or a hospital. Within homes, in the private way, in the private side, the majority of women have to cope not only with the domestic chores, but also in the case of formal employees with home office and with the continuity of virtual education of their children.
For the children.
Increase of unpaid work. Tasks that were in the public spaces now are carried out at homes. Children are not going to school. The elderly and sick people require more care because they are at risk. They stay at home because of the fear to go to the hospitals and health centers. Those tasks might be shared, but remain mostly on the responsibility of mothers and other feminine family members. This is one of the issues of the inequality of care that we have. Within homes, I think virtual schooling. This is a huge problem for all women of all social classes, but women of higher social classes could set a special room with blackboards, with a special table, and with the computer and the iPad and something else to help their children to study. But at least 15% of the population in Argentina don't have internet connection, especially in poor neighborhoods and in the most isolated regions, not speaking about computer and a tablet or something else. In many cases, the access to internet is in a limited way, only with the use of data from cell phones. I launched the career I have, that is a master degree on human rights in human rights and social policies, and I found that there are a lot of my students that the only way to connect in the virtual classes is with their cell phones. They don't have a computer at home. They have the computer at work. Limitations, and also with all this situation, limitations on the part of the adults to accompany the processes of teaching, learning of children and adolescents. In some cases, because they can't cope with this kind of tasks that are overwhelming all the time. And in some cases, but they don't want to. And there is some kind of situation or not being so comfortable with the lot of homework that teachers are sending to children, and obviously some person in charge of the children have to help the children to do that. Health and labor risks. In the poor neighborhoods, women participate and take care of all kinds of services, especially related to the comedores, the community food provisions, that we know a lot about that in all Latin America. When I was writing this, I was thinking about the Copa de Leche de Lima, de Peru, a lot of years ago. And also they work as health agents. They go talk with their the neighbors, and they explain that they have to take care, and so and so. And they put their lives at risk in the neighborhood. This is Ramona Medina. This is kind of a token of in Argentina to speak about the risk that community activist members are having now. She is a member of the organization La Garganta Poderosa, the Mighty Throat. I think it is correct, the translation. She died from COVID-19 last week. Roger Waters received the news, and he sent to this organization, La Garganta Poderosa, his condolences for Ramona. I knew Ramona in a seminar we organized in the university. And this photo of Ramona, she is speaking about denouncing the situation in her neighborhood. And this photo, how she looked at us, says everything about what is happening to me, for example, what is happening with poor women and strong women and militants, but also they couldn't take care of themselves. And all these persons are members of her family. Most of them are also infected. I say something about this, and if to finish. The other sector that is at risk is women workers in private households. 98% are women between the ages of 35 to 54. 44 are heads of households and sole breadwinners. They are the most vulnerable groups in the country. International Labour Organization said that about 1.4 million people are exposed to the risks of the health and labor risks of the pandemic in this segment of the labor market. I have this information, but I couldn't have time to check the quantity of women workers in private households in Brazil, for example. That is one of the countries that has more women working in this vulnerable, terrible vulnerable sector. The government established that they had to stay at home during the quarantine, and they have to be paid, as happened with other formal workers. Notwithstanding, many of them were required, obliged for their employment, by their employments, to go to work under the menace of being fired. Also, in many cases, they were not provided with the necessary health security materials. In the huge panorama, we are facing difficulties related to subsistence work, not only women, but also men, self-employed, in precarious and informal jobs, but always in this sector, women are overrepresented. Repair, service, domestic services, domestic works, artisans, sex workers, among others. Sex workers are not going to, they can't work. So their incomes are also jeopardized. Workers in agricultural areas, people that must stock up on food daily, pick up food to pick this to community spaces, stock up on water. This Ramona live in a neighborhood in the city of Buenos Aires that is very, very near to a very high social class neighborhood, and they had suffered the absence of water. Mm. And this occurred in the city of Buenos Aires. Stay at home. I wonder which home. Comfortable homes which protect against the harshness of the outside world, where we can be infected by the virus. Ideal family relationships based on love and respect among all the members and without any equality of power. Family relationships can be the place of protection but all the protection of love, but also of hatred, abuse, mistreatment, violence against women, lesbian and trans, children, adolescents, and the elderly. This obviously leads us to violence against women and children, increasing intrafamily tensions, increase in gender and domestic violence, violations of perimeter restrictions, interruption of social services in some places due to the isolation measure, such as care in situations of gender violence. This is how violence increases and pave the way for femicides. In 2020, from January to March, there were 86 femicides, 14 more than in the same period of 2019, but it is from January to March. During April that we were in quarantine, there were 31 deaths. But if we take the part of March that we started the quarantine and the whole April, 36 women were killed. This is a slight increase of the quantity of women killed because of their condition of women. But we have to continue looking at the figures to know how it could be developed in the future. But also we have to be aware that there is a situation of police abuse, not military, but police abuse towards specific populations, immigrants, homeless, young people. So young people are being abused by policy, not only in the poor neighborhood, but also in different neighborhoods, because this is a heritage we have from the 4 years of neoliberal government in Argentina, where the idea of kill a delinquent was established and was congratulated by the president of the nation. It's not my word. You can check this in the newspapers of this period. For example, one policeman killed a thief, killing him from the back, and the president invited him to talk in the presidential house, for example. And this gave to all the armed forces, police, patrol force, the permission to kill people. I am not exaggerating. I can finish here, and I can take something of this in the next question.
Yes. I was going to suggest that. Okay. Can you close this, Graciela, for the moment?
Okay.
Can you close your PowerPoint so we can just?
Yes.
Yes. Good. Thank you very much. And now we are going to the other two questions. I'm going to put them together because then we win time and we don't, because we have only 1.5 hours and now we are going to have, time is running very quickly. So the next questions are how the feminist movements have been affected by the measures from the government, and what type of reactions do we have from different feminist groups, different women's groups, given to these measures and to the repercussion of these measures. So one is how the feminist movements in your countries have been affected by these measures, and the other one, what type of reactions from the part of different groups can we see to all these confinement measures, to all the government policies. And after that, I hope we have some time for some questions because we have already been receiving some questions. Okay, so we start again with Virginia. Virginia.
Okay, well, what are we doing? I think that faced with the impossibility of taking the streets, we have begun to look how to connect, which are the forms, the new forms of organization that we have to look after, and which are the collective articulation that we have to promote. Because I think that, well, some of the previous ways of organization have lost the strength, but there are a lot of new ones that have emerged. Webinars, spaces to change realities about the situation of women, indigenous women connected also to put highlight the situation of the countryside and the Amazon, especially the Amazon, handicapped women also asking for recognition, etc. No? And I think that there is a turn, I will say a turn in the agenda, the feminist agenda, because approaches to as eco-dependence, interdependence, and the ethics of care and care economy began to be absolutely central, because it involves not only co-responsibility, but also appears to be the most vital activity in the face of the virus, as we have seen with the work of women in the houses, much more work, and with the work of the nurses and doctors in the public, no? So I think that ethic of care began to be a new paradigm that we really have to consider, because also brings another kind of notions that have been devaluated by patriarchal and colonial capitalism, no? A solidarity, reciprocity, interdependence, complementarity between human and nature, no? So I think that the most important thing for me in this moment, or for us, for the women, the feminists that we are in touch, is to change our vision of the way of living, in the sense that it is a moment of introspection. It forces us to go beyond what we know, and to have a kind of, as Maristela Tuampa says, a cognitive liberation, to think that what we saw as distant and impossible maybe is possible now, or maybe the only way to go further from the crisis, no? And when Latin America has a powerful movements, and that the feministas, indigenous, Afro-Latino, eco-territorial movement for climate justice, etc., and a lot of networks and articulations. So I think that there is an important connection with the different other agendas, as feminist, indigenous, Afro-Latina, sexual dissident movements, etc. And also there is a very common concern in this moment from different levels of the reality of women, to a connection for abortion in the case of unwanted pregnancy, because of rape, product of the time of pandemic and the quarantine. It's very, very urgent for us to see this. And the most very important thing is that we have the proposals. We are not alone in this look. We have the proposal of the indigenous worldviews, for example, and the Afro worldviews that give a very important clue to confront the capitalist, patriarchal, and colonial racist model. coming from the indigenous communities. For example, good living or buen vivir has a whole articulation with a new way of looking, developing in our countries. It's also a thing that can be, is in another kinds of culture, putting in evidence that we cannot measure life with a single Western hegemonic worldview, but also from the connection at global and regional level. So I think that it is a kind of abysmal moment, and that normality cannot return as the way that it was, no? What has been normality has been the most abnormal and pernicious relation to humanity and to nature. So the dilemma in that sense is very clear, no? Or we return to capitalist, patriarchal, and colonial system without change, or we began to search another kind of world or of relations. It is not immediately, it is not a thing that we are going to have tomorrow, but it has to be the kind of horizon of perspective of change. And finally, we need to affirm an anti-systemic perspective, obviously, for this to surpass the crisis. And it is crucial also to recover democracy, that it has been co-opted by many of the governments, not all, luckily not Argentina, I think that not also Peru, but all Brazil and Nicaragua and many others, I think, are in that situation, no? And to have to recover democracy from daily life and interpersonal relations, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, and anti-body rights relations, no? So it is, I think, essential to demand channels with the public power to have influence in these things, to recover the articulation of the women as comedores, the popular kitchens that was saying Graciela. And obviously, we are not alone in this. This is a global thing, and we need to have a planetary interdependence perspective. And the interesting thing is some of the struggles that women are doing to confront the crisis in this moment is an articulation of a struggle. For example, in countries like Brazil, the fight against the pandemic take place together with the fight of Fora Bolsonaro, Go Out Bolsonaro. It's a campaign to have much more vision of changing the government, and not only of changing the situation of women. And this means to have a convergence between feminist movement and environmental movement, solidarity, etc., no? Because the struggles for the defense of women's life is very important, but it's not only, we know, to recover the existence of more embodied bodies. This is making evident that there are more lives that do not count and bodies that do not matter in this society. So the struggle for defending the indigenous and the Afro and the sexual diversity rights are fundamental. And the need to change our economy is also a fundamental challenge for us in this moment. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Gina. And Paloma?
Thank you. Well, so as for answering these two questions in one, let me go to, okay. I'm gonna try to, oh, sorry. Share screen. I'm looking for my share screen. Let me, ay, no, bueno, qué cosa. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So, well, what has been the impact of COVID on Indigenous women's movement? We do have an Indigenous women's movement in Mexico and in Latin America. in Mexico, the cuts of public funding and the pandemic has led to a new mobilization of indigenous women's organizations. Since they regularly meet and they do work physically together, this has been a very strong, challenge to keep on working and keep on going on their agendas when they don't have the possibility of getting together. So, well, since domestic violence has increased, and since they don't have access to social security or social healthcare services, they have mobilized in order to fulfill this emptiness. And so what we have is now that indigenous women have been like showing out what they need, what they propose, what they're experiencing, what they're going through. And this has led to a new or a renewed visibilization of their conditions, their proposals, and their views of this pandemic and their possible effects. There's also a very interesting issue regarding the technological gap. Since many or most of indigenous women do not have computer at home, most of them or many of them do not have even electricity at home. This kind of communication that we are sharing now is not possible to them. So they've been relying on their cell phones also. They've been relying on their, what we call the internet cafes or cyber cafes. And they've been trying to get into contact with people who do have computer or at least internet in order to get information, to let their messages out. But this has been a very important process of networking for them. So now we do have a strong networking of indigenous women around the possibility of communicate between themselves and with other actors and other spaces. So, but this also has led to it has underlined the importance of this inequality, this technological inequality, which is crucial in this moment. I mean, if you don't have a cell phone, or if you don't have a computer, or if you don't have internet, you're kind of out of the world. And this has been very important for the indigenous women's movement now. There's also, since they are demobilized, they're facing the risk of losing the spaces and resources that they've already got, which are not very much, but they do have them. As for example, some work with the communities, some interaction with women and communities in rural areas and also in the cities. And this is a risk that they face, and they are very aware of this because they think that if they do not continue the work that they've been doing, for example, in gender violence prevention, this situation is going to go to the worst. So for indigenous women's movement, this pandemic has led to a prioritization of their needs and their demands. Well, let me see. So, well, what has happened in Mexico in these 2 or 3 months? First of all, we had this huge movement on March the 8th. We've experienced manifestations and marches and enormous mobilization also with indigenous women. And this was disregarded by the Mexican government. We've had this, we have this very peculiar government now which stands as a leftist government, but not as a feminist one. So it's been like going upon the women's rights every time, every opportunity it has. So after the the celebration of March the 8th, in which indigenous women did have their own agenda, and they mobilized and they showed their own priorities and demands. The government has had this discourse of that quarantine has led to better family relationships, that we have a fraternal family networking and cultural heritage in Mexico. And so this last week, women all over the country have had this movement through internet that has been named as We Have Other Figures. He said, the president said that 90% of emergency calls of denouncing domestic violence are false. So women all over the country have said and have manifested, or we have manifested ourselves saying we have other figures. And this also has been, indigenous women have been taking this movement also for themselves. They do not have the public services to attend domestic violence, but they have shown that this problem has increased, that the feminicides have not stopped. We have 10 femicides a day in Mexico, and it hasn't stopped. And it's gone beyond cities, and it's covered also indigenous and rural areas. So, well, what has happened is that there are 3 national indigenous women's organizations, and they've mobilized for the last month in order to demand the resources the public resources the government has to give them in order to keep on with their work as defending indigenous women from violence and sexual and advocating for the sexual and reproductive rights. The government has cut these public fundings, and this has led to a very interesting alliance between the feminist movement, the indigenous feminists, and also the academic sphere. And so it's been a month in Mexico where we have had, like press conferences, daily news about what's happening with this public funding of indigenous organizations. And so this has led to a new awareness that in Mexico we have to, I think it's the same in all over America, Latin America, but we have to distinguish between the different conditions of indigenous, of women, and the feminist movements. And so what I have witnessed is a very strong solidarity towards indigenous women's demands and priorities. So this has led to a discussion, a public discussion, at least in Facebook and this social networking, that we need to think about how to get equal rights for diverse women. And this is a discussion that is taking place right now. So indigenous women have shown that they need their collective rights as members of indigenous groups and their individual rights as women and citizens to be respected. And so what I can say about this pandemic crisis, which is sanitary, but it's also social and political crisis, is that we cannot think about the effects and impact of such a process as the same in societies that are characterized for their profound inequality. Because as my colleagues had said, women, we do not experience the effects of this pandemic the same. Although we have all experienced the increasing burden of our domestic and family care chores, we do not have the same risks, and we do not face the same limitations. So what we've seen in Mexico, which is a very, very violent country, and we're, I mean, well, that's a very sad and different issue, is that gender oppression is worse when you don't have an economic autonomy, when you don't have public support, and when you lose all your income, all your sources of income. So in Mexico, indigenous women's organizations are relying on their traditional ways of resistance, and they're showing that their political, social, cultural, and ethical values could be very useful for a society as discriminatory and inequality as ours. And on the other side, well, this is very important because this pandemic has been taken. I mean, the conservative sectors in Mexico have taken the opportunity to exploit the confinement in order to pass laws, local laws. For example, criminalizing abortion in one of our northern states, and also to introduce the notion of human rights since conception in 2 different states. So what we have as a challenge as a feminist movement in Mexico is to how do we weave networks in order to stop the conservatives who are like going forward in these times. So, well, I'm going to leave it in here. Thank you.
Good. So please, Graciela, and thank you. And I hope you can be in 10 minutes so we can have open for the questions as well.
I will go to other aspects. What happens? I can't. I will go to another here. I also have joined together the second and the third question because I thought that they could be responded with similar discourses. As I told about the previous situation, structural inequality situation in Argentina, and that is very similar to other countries, to understand this precise moment of what happens with the feminist movements, I have to start telling all the audience that we have a new president that took office on December 10 after 4 years of openly neoliberal government. And for us, this is for us, maybe for other people, no, but for the people who voted him and he won, this is the best notice, the best news we could have, because we know that coping and management, this situation with the neoliberal government could be equal what happens in Brazil or in Chile, or what happened in the United Kingdom, or what happens in the States, because they put economy first. We have a lot of problems. The president is negotiating the debt that was taken by the former government, but here the decision was to put health at the first place. The government restored the rank of the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Labor that had been demoted into secretaries in the previous government. You know, Argentina has all a tradition about social rights. And health and work were as the pillars, I don't know, the centers of the conception of social policy in our country. And they were diminished to be secretaries, and now are again ministries. And on March 20, Argentina entered into the nationwide quarantine. Today, we have in these cases 12.60 and something in all in the infected, and in the metropolitan area, which is now concentrated in the infection, we have more than 4,000 in the province of Buenos Aires, and more of almost 6,000 in the city of Buenos Aires. And we have more than maybe 500 of diseased people that continue to be a good a figure in terms of what is, if we compare with another situations in other countries. But the starting point was considering that the challenge of the pandemic is not only a health issue. You know, it is, as Paloma or Gina told, it is something that we have to cope with thinking in social, cultural, economic, not only in health. So the government decided articulated policies that I can't in detail now, but I will tell that there are a portfolio of emergency subsidies, for example, for low-income citizens, retirees who earn the minimum, reinforcement of the plan Argentina Against the Hunger that was launched in January when this new administration started to govern, etc. And the other aspect that I want to highlight is that there are articulations between social movements and the government. In higher positions in the state, also there are people that come from social movements. And feminist movements, through more than 30 years of persistent mobilizations that were intensified in recent years regarding various demands, promote great visibility of these demands in the society and in the state. And they have installed in the public agenda sexual rights, the right to live a life without violence, the right to abortion, to sexuality education, equal pay, and principles of economy, feminist economy, all of which prompted the presence of feminists in high positions in the state administration. Mm-hmm. There was something very funny. I don't know if I can tell it in English. When the president had his words when he took office, he said in some moment, we have to be. He was thinking about we have to be mejores, we have to be better. And mejores is very similar to mujeres in Spanish. And he said, we have to be mujeres. This was because in his, I think that he is very aware about all the feminist demands and the strong the strengths of feminist movements in a way that the presence of feminists in high positions in the state administration, you know, sometimes they could be put there as tokens. But the people, feminist women that are in the state in this moment are militants that have a strong history of being in all our demands, in our struggles, and really they are thinking about the state, taking into consideration, putting gender, sexual diversity, and Afro-descendants, all the situations in the first place. The National Ministry for Women, Gender and Policy and Sexual Diversity, National Ministry of Security, Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity in the province. What happens today? As Gina said, feminists continue mobilized, but not not necessarily in a presential way. But in some cases also, there were some protests in which young feminist women went to the protest in keeping the social distance, but they were protesting because there were a denial of an abortion to a very, very young girl. Because, as they say, conservatives are considering this situation to go against some kind, a lot of rights that we got. And this is something that we have to be aware and alert all the time. The feminist movement are active through the networks and with the presence when it is necessary, as I said. And you know that feminists are we are very creative. So they there was an organization of a noise against gender violence and femicide. It was very, very funny because the situation was not funny, but the way in which the feminist movement thought about protesting in the quarantine times. The motto was quarantine yes, and this is something that, you know, the feminist movement is considering that the government measures are accurate. Quarantine yes, violence no. No one less, stop killing us, quarantine yes, violence no, and emergency no one less. The call was made from the networks, from various organizations, Not One Less Collective, Mumala, La Casa del Encuentro, and other NGOs and unions and groups gathered together in this kind of noisy manifestation. Another idea that is not, I don't know if it is continuous, was the red chin strap. The Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity launched a new campaign named Barbijo Rojo, Red Chin Strap, by which women who fear for their safety can go to a local pharmacy and ask for a red chin strap, and the pharmacist will ask for help to this WhatsApp and emails and telephones from the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity. The other, something that I'm very proud and I want to highlight with all of you is that as like never before in a government, scientists were recognized. As opposed to the neoliberal government of the CEOs of the previous administration, scientists are part of a committee of advisors to the president from the very day of taking office. So it was very easy for the government to, in order to manage the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, a group of advisors was organized with the more distinguished infectologists, epidemiologists, medical doctors, anthropologists, sociologists, in a way in which, as we said, that the former government was the government of the CEOs, now the opposition says that this government is the government of the scientists, and it is really very, very bad that scientists could have so much power. It's not wonderful. So it is the first time in which scientists, all kinds of scientists, not only those related to health, but also social sciences and other kind of science, are are asked by the government to give their knowledge in order to think about this situation that when I teach about the contingency and that nothing is written in nowhere, now this, the pandemic is the terrible example of contingency. So everyone has to learn how to do that, and maybe what we are doing now in the future is not, we will realize that this was not a good idea, but this is a learning process, a continuous learning process. And the state has to guarantee the fulfillment, health, educational, economic, cultural, gender, sexuality, children, and elders' rights. And in my country, some journalists especially said that we found a father that take care of us. It is not true. This is not patriarchal assistance. We are not talking about the state as a father or as a mother. We are talking about rights and collective care. I am very happy that the case of ethic of care is now discussed in everywhere. I put the ethic of care side by side by the ethic of rights when we created the Center of Democratization of Human Rights. And we have the honor of inviting John Tronto, that is one of the academics that work a lot about, from philosophy in the ethic of care, going further than Carol Gilligan's essentialist speaking or discourse, and considering who are the people that are considered doing care task. And she said, the world will look different if the care could move care from its current peripheral location to a place near the center of human life. And I think that this is the challenge. Put care not only of this kind of task that unprivileged people do for a living, but put care in the center together with human rights. For this, the same principle that Gina puts in the table, to humanize humanity, if you ask me for a way of saying it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graciela. We have now a little bit, like 10 minutes, just to answer some questions. And I had already one question waiting from the beginning here. And Cristina Leval is, she would like to know, let me see, what are, let me see if I can, yes. What are the governments doing to secure women's rights? What is actually said about women's situation? Can you say something about the future? What challenges can you identify?
Oh,
we have only
speaking about that.
Yes, yes. You have, some of you have spoken about that. I think Graciela has done a lot about that. I don't know, Paloma, do you want to add something like that? You have said also a little bit about the situation regarding the lack of empathy from the government. Do you want to add something to that?
Well, I just would like to say that this lack of empathy is not only a personal issue. I mean, from the president, it's a very damaging situation because it controls the possibility of the institutions that we have to protect women's rights, the rights to do their job. So we are facing a very risky situation here, because if you point out that this self-said leftist president is like, you know, not protecting women's rights, you're labeled as a right-wing opposition. And so we are now facing the very peculiar situation that women's rights are not being in the governmental agenda, not even in the discourse. And so this is very challenging for the feminist movement, but I know that we'll get through it, and we'll find the way to show that women's rights are human rights, and there's also it's the state's obligation, the state's the state's function to protect these rights and to make them real. That's all now.
Do you want to add anything? Yes, Gina?
Yes, very little, because I think also the government has been moving in that sense to support, to give money to the most needed, the ones that are without employment and etc. But obviously it's not enough. People are really with problems. So, but there is a kind of the government has taken the responsibility for that, they said. At the same time, you realize that they are giving much more money to the empresas, how do you say it? It's not enterprises, but enterprises, and that have a lot of money accumulated from their own way of doing before. So it is very, very, very complicated. At the same time, they are pushing a very, very strong, drastic health reform, because the health system has collapsed totally. I think that in many parts of Latin America, but I can speak about Peru. We are the second one that have more dead people in relation to the other countries. Still, they are not as much as the ones that are infected. So yeah, we are in that situation, still in the process of coming, trying to put the crisis began to be down, but we are in that. But government is doing what they want, what they can do for that.
And finally, do you feel like societies and governments have become more aware of gender issues with the pandemic? Has the COVID-19 crisis brought new light to feminist movements and their activists, or is this yet another issue that is added on women's situation in general? And this is very, very short. Perhaps one of you wants. Yes. Yes.
I think that,
very short.
It is possible that the government has to look into the demands and the achievements of feminist movements, because they have to go to all the resources they have, and this is a way of looking at this, because women are in the front of all this kind of care work, but also something that I think that miss in for example, when we talk about articulation of when we talk about crisis, civilization crisis, and several academics talk about this and put all the kind of situations that could describe a civilization crisis, but they don't put enough for me, the crisis of gender relationships. And for going through a new paradigm, we need to put the conception, the anti-patriarchalism in the center of a new paradigm for the humanity. Because there could be a very good ideas about a new kind of society, and maybe some people think about environmental issues, but also environmental issues could be without women. We have to put women, more than women, we have to put the questioning of patriarchy in the center, not as in one side, in the center of the thinking of a new paradigm.
Okay, we have several other questions, but I'm afraid we have to close at half. So we have only 6 minutes left, and I would love to continue the discussion. I hope there will be other occasions to continue the discussion as well with you. I would like very much to organize more webinars like this. But before we finish, I want to thank you, all of you, for having participating, for having prepared all this, and having given us this enormous overview of what is happening in your countries, but also in the rest of Latin America. And I also wanted to say that this has been organized by several organizations, by GADIP, Gender and Development in Practice, by the university, the Latin American Seminar, and by White Cruz. That's why you see Gea there, because she has been the one helping us to put together all these webinars and all these mechanisms. Gea is our coordinator in White Cruz Women in Development Europe, and she's supporting very much this webinar. So I would like to thank everybody, and to invite you to a continuation of this conversation, perhaps sometime in the coming months. And I'm very sorry that we cannot answer all the questions that you have got. We got
very interesting. That were very interesting. What a pity.
We got up to 46 participants. Some have already left, but I think it's a very good assistance. And I think that this shows that these are very interesting themes. These are very interesting subjects, and that we would like to continue this conversation later on. And just to say also that this is being recorded, and the recording is going to be put in our page, the GADIP's homepage, GADIP, Gender and Development in Practice, who is part of this organization. So we are going to have this recording accessible for all of you that want to see again, or those who have not been able to attend. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much. And we will, as I said before, we will continue with this conversation sometime in the future.
That'd be great.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Take care. All of you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.